I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now, here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 1718 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, as told to you by yours truly, and Dr. Bob Rodrigues, a history professor from Duquesne University up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In this episode, he will be continuing his look at 1968 in Vietnam with an examination of the Tet Offensive with emphasis on the battle at Hue. He gives a moving account of those dark days in Vietnam. As I usually do, I encourage you to have pen and paper nearby so you can take notes and get rid of all your distractions. Turn off the TV, the game console, and your cell phone. Also, ask the loud talkers in the room to go some other place so you can hear what Dr. Bob has to say. It is that important. We're going to begin with Dr. Bob talking about President Johnson being distracted by the battle at Khe Sanh. So without any further ado, Dr. Bob, you have the microphone. Go for it.
His thinking was focused on Khe Sanh. Then, on the night of January 31st, now we had that previous attack on 7 cities, okay? But on January 31st, attacks are consummated on 33 out of the 38 provincial capitals in South Vietnam. Over 100 cities were hit. The goal was really to inspire the South Vietnamese to rise up against the ARVN and the United States, was to bring them out of the woodwork, so to speak. And that was to try to just overwhelm the government and armies in South Vietnam. VC and NVA soldiers were both part of the attacks. Even the American embassy was breached, as well as the capital of South Vietnam, Saigon. So this was just a hit all over South Vietnam. One of the key cities that was attacked and where probably the most brutal fighting occurred was on the Hue City, Hue, Hue. It is on the coast. It's up toward the 17th parallel, and it's on the sea. It was the imperial capital of Vietnam for hundreds of years. They called it the imperial city. In Hue, they had a citadel, and this is where the emperor stayed. And this citadel had a wall around it, and the were about 10 feet high, 3 feet, almost 3 feet thick, 2.5, and had a circumference of about what amounted to about 4 or 5 miles. And people lived in there, but this is where the Imperial Palace was. This is where Hue University was. This, in fact, was the cultural center of Vietnam. They had the city, but then they had the citadel was part of the city. This was where the emperors lived. And there were fights in Hue for the entire city, all over Hue City and the citadel. The NVA had breached the citadel, and they set up almost a compound there. And American Marines had a fight to drive them out. But some of the most ferocious fighting took place in Hue City itself. And this was urban fighting. It was not fighting in the jungles that we had been doing for years now. And this was going from door to door to door to dig out the enemy. When we first sent troops in there, we sent 300 Marines into Hue City. It was believed that it was just a mop-up duty. Actually, what we were trying to do was rescue the MAC-V compound there. There was a MAC-V in Hawaii City. But once the Marines got in there, they realized that the intel had been wrong. There was not a small force there. There were 16,000 North Vietnamese regulars. So we had 300 Marines going against them. When they wired back for help, they were told, nope, that you're wrong. That's not there. We don't have anybody to send up there or anything like that, because fighting was going on. So these 300 Marines, and later reinforced, battled for 30 days in Hawaii City at great cost, but more to the enemy. Probably the best account that I have ever read of Hawaii City. It is entitled Hawaii 1968 by Mark Bowden. I highly recommend it. It is gripping, and you don't put it down. It's a 30-day battle, Hawaii City. I've also had the opportunity to meet and become friends with one of the 300 Marines who were sent in there. And his story is simply compelling. And one day I will tape him and maybe share it with Matt, because it's quite a story of what happened to him on that first day that he went in. So Hawaii City was tragic in the sense that this beautiful imperial city, full of culture, was essentially destroyed. If you look at pictures of Hawaii City after this, you'll just see rock and rubble. In fact, one American commander made the comment, he says, we had to destroy Hawaii City in order to save it. So you hear the irony in that. There were massacres in Hawaii City done by the NVA, and there were 3 phases of them. Phase 1 was a series of kangaroo court trials of local ARVN officials. They were publicized, and they lasted anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, and the accused were always found guilty of crimes against the people and executed. Phase 2 came about when the communists thought that they could hold the city long term because of the small number of Marines that were in the city. Started to create a campaign of social reconstruction. And basically what that was brainwashing along communist lines, Maoist dogma. Those who the communists believed to be counter-revolutionaries were singled out in this race. Catholics, intellectuals, businessmen, and other lackeys were targeted in order to build a new social order. The last phase came when it became evident that the communists were not going to hold the city. This was designed to leave no witnesses. Anyone who could identify anybody of the VC or NVA, some of the VC came up as well, who participated in the occupation of the city was to be killed and their bodies hidden. This was probably between 3,000 and 5,000 Hawaii City residents, and some were buried alive, some were decapitated, tortured, all sorts of means by which these residents were killed. In all, 550,000 Americans engaged in more than 200 major combat operations and dropped more than 500,000 tons of bombs. And the overall financial cost of the war just that year, 1968, totaled $20 billion. And that, of course, is 1968 dollars. Hawaii City was in rubble. Once the United States and ARVN troops got their footing and got over the initial surprise, they began to beat back the VC and the NVA and to slowly retake the cities. The uprising that the Communist Party in North Vietnam had expected and had wanted to stimulate never really occurred. They obviously the any VC and so on, they came up, but they were hoping for a greater groundswell of residents in the various cities to jump to war and to help them. And this just didn't occur. And as a result, it led to their defeat. Militarily, there's no doubt that the United States and the Army won the Tet Offensive. Militarily, we won the offensive. However, the fallout from Tet, even though it was a military victory, it was a political loss. It was a political loss in the sense that Americans who had just been fed the success campaign a few months earlier now were watching vivid accounts and vivid footage of the Tet Offensive in their living rooms. They were seeing death in front of them, live, not Hollywood. And this was just an incredible shock to many Americans. And the protests now began to emerge even stronger. This was, in a sense, we were being lied to. Now, during the Hawaii attacks, an American TV personality who did the news, probably one of the most respected faces on TV, Walter Cronkite, traveled to Hawaii City during all this urban fighting. Remember now, Cronkite had taken part in World War II. He dropped into Holland. He was a D-Day. I mean, this man was respected. He was first put on CBS as a newscaster in Labor Day of 1963. He interviewed John F. Kennedy. And at that time, Kennedy actually gave a warning on TV to No Din Siem that he had better shape up with his government. That was the preliminary message, and that was Cronkite's first guess. Okay? So by 1968, he had become the face of American news, and he was trusted. Let me play you a little account. This is when Cronkite came back from Hawaii City, and he reported to the American people.
It seems now more certain than ever that the bloody experience of Vietnam is to end in a stalemate. But it is increasingly clear to this report that the only rational way out then will be to negotiate, not as victors, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could.
That was Walter Cronkite 50 years ago tonight. 33 days later, President Johnson announced he would not run for re-election. Years later, Cronkite reflected on Johnson's decision.
I don't think our broadcast had a principal effect on that, but I think it was a straw on the back of a lot of indications that he was unhappy with the progress of the war and thought he himself ought to get out.
As Cronkite indicated, on March the 31st, Lyndon Johnson is going to announce that he will not run for office.
That was Dr. Bob's description of the Tet Offensive with emphasis on the battle at Hue. It was a terrible thing. He mentioned in there that we won the battle militarily, but lost the political battle there thanks to Walter Cronkite. In the next episode, Dr. Bob is going to move on another terrible episode of the year 1968 in Vietnam, and that is the My Lai Massacre. Don't miss it. He's going to put out some very important information about that event that we should all know about so that hopefully it will never, ever happen again. This is Mac Payne closing out episode 1718 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. Thank you so much for coming to listen to these stories. You are cordially invited to come again soon and often to listen to more coming your way on this podcast, the Vietnam Veteran News.
How about that? Ain't that a mess?